Welcome to the Not Just Waiting podcast. I'm your host, Brianna Hoffman, and this is a space for women learning to wait well and live fully. Whether you're in the middle of uncertainty, transition, or just figuring out what's next, this podcast is here to remind you you are not behind, not forgotten, and definitely not just waiting. Let's dig into truth, grow in courage, and hold on to hope together. Welcome back to the Not Just Waiting podcast. If you listened to part 1 of my conversation with Megan Draper, you know we went there. We talked about becoming, about the stories we carry, and the power of the gospel to shape not just where we've been, but who we're becoming. And today we're continuing that conversation because it's one thing to talk about becoming. It's another thing to actually live it out. How do we stay rooted in truth when our stories feel messy or unfinished? How do we walk in our calling without striving or losing ourselves along the way? Megan shares so much wisdom here, not just from what she's built, but from the way she's walked with Jesus through it. So wherever you find yourself today, in the middle of your story, in the tension of becoming, I think this conversation is going to meet you there. Let's jump back in. And I think we do make it 100% about us. And when we make it about us, we miss the point. And then we can't convey to other people this goodness and the glory because we have made it so far much about us that we've missed the point and don't know what we know what we're talking about. It's the whole quoting word of a virgin. And then you have to explain what that is and why it's important. And when you don't have any context, it doesn't really matter. And then you have him your 8-year-old can tell you that. They don't know what that means. I mean, me as a 22-something-year-old was like, okay, but why is this important? Because nobody ever told me that. And you dying on a cross for our sins and defeating death and being resurrected. When you hear that your whole life, you're like, duh, resurrection's a thing. To them, it wasn't. Or you talking about Moses and Joshua.
Right.
We know the sea's going to part. We know that the sea is going to part. They didn't. And a lot of times in our lives, when we're in the becoming season, especially you talking about wanting a child. There's a season that I'm kind of in with that. And I had a conversation with another girl about it this morning. We're in different seasons, and so it's kind of fresh. But we see in your life and in other people's lives that the Lord has provided. We also see in the Bible that the Lord kept people so that he could prove his glory. And you're like, I want to be both. Can I be both? Can you give can you deliver me now?
Yes.
And can you give me the miraculous that these people get? Like Hannah, the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel. She's barren, and then the Lord gives her her son, and then she has to give him back. It's not like she gets to raise him. She literally has to give him back. And you're like, Lord, I want my child to be like Samuel, but I don't want to give him back.
This is where I want that story to change. Yes.
Both. But I don't want to go through the hard to get there. I don't want to have to wait and pray and beg and follow what he asks of me because it's hard and it's scary. But we get the privilege of having the Bible and seeing the stories and seeing how he provides in crazy, miraculous ways. And you're like, if he can do it for them, why can't he do it for me? But at the same time, I'm like, I would like a map. And I would like to know how you're going to provide for me. And I would like to know what I need to say yes to and what I need to say no to so that your will can be fulfilled.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. And the yes, right? One of the quotes that I love in the John Mark Comer, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he talks about sometimes you have to say no to yeses in order to get the best yes. Good. You have to say no to good yeses to get the best yes. And I'm like, it's all of those things of how do we get his best yes? And that's our desire, not when our heart is pure, not for our own fulfillment, right? But again, the opportunity to say, to point back to him and to do that. And it's hard in every season. And the waiting, the waiting just makes it where I feel like when we really are in a waiting season, right? And I think we all if we think about our faith, we all are in a waiting season at some level.
Mhm.
But when we're waiting for an answer or we're waiting for something immediate that we think shouldn't be the hope of heaven wait, but the hope of what's happening in our hands. Um, it's also because there's a void of other things, and that's the focus, right? And so that's always been, how do we shift the focus? How do we, I think about it more than I should. Like, how do I, again, what are those micro changes? And I love this new phrase. It's probably not new, but it's something that, again, coincidentally keeps popping up all over the place. But what is it that's not, I'm not going to eat any sugar whatsoever. I'm not going to blah, blah, blah. But it's I'm going to read the whole Bible in a month, right? No, it's like, how do and let's dig into Joshua. How do I read this and make it count rather than and shifting that focus a little bit at a time. I think also for Christians who've been Christians for a really long time, for me, I don't want to confess that it isn't the focus that I already was at. Of course, I'm looking to Jesus. Yes, I'm pointing to him. Yes. But in the void of that weight, where do we focus? I focus too much on me. you know?
I think we all do, though. It's like you saying that, I can tell you every answer. I'm kind of like your husband and did the Bible drill things
Yes.
and got scholarships for it, and, like, you
Check
naming
you
off
out,
stories today,
girl.
I could tell you where they are. Um, but with that, I have all the knowledge, but my life doesn't always have the context. And so even, like, looking, when you're, like, a single human and you're, like, in your 20s or your teens, you're like, "I want the Lord to be my husband." You know what I'm talking about? And there's nothing wrong with that. I had no context to that until I got married,
You're right.
and I was like, "Oh, this is what that means."
Yeah.
I didn't need somebody to bring me flowers and tell me I'm pretty. I
Mm-mm.
needed somebody who, when I got sick, was gonna take care of me and make me things and make sure I took care of myself and called to check in and turned on the light. Like, I needed all those extra stuff that
Yeah.
I didn't know about until I got married.
Right.
And I think a lot of times our life and the seasons that we go through and the hard things give us that context that we wouldn't have. I'm not saying I want them,
Right.
but they do give that good context to where we can relate to the Lord more. We get to gain some intimacy with Him in the stories that we've learned our entire lives.
And the Donald Miller book, The Miles and Years, that I can't get the right numbers. Like that is like it's a really beautiful story, and he shares and is very vulnerable in it. It's probably like a book from 1997. Like it's been a while, but there's a whole section, and he talks about when he talks about stories. That's what the whole book is about, creating your story and what stories are good and how do you make a good story. And then he like turns it inward, right? But then he talks about um he's creating a movie from a book that he had written before, is the whole kind of premise of this book that he's writing. And so they're taking different parts. And so there's a producer and a director and all these he's working with. And so he's like, okay, at this point, we're going to do this great thing. He's like, no, you haven't gone through the hard thing yet. He's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well, in every good story, there is a hard thing that the character has to overcome." And I was like, "Oh, come on." Right? But it's true. Again, and in that season apart is where you learn and you grow and you implement all of the things that you've learned and that you can point back to. And that's the season where it's forming. It really truly is forming what is going to come next and how. Yeah. So it's again, coincidental that all these things are coming in, right? But the story, there has to be a hard part. And I never want to admit that part.
Hey, friend, before we continue, I want to share something that I created for those of you who are in a waiting season right now. If you're waiting on clarity, direction, healing, or a next step, and you're tired of feeling like this season is just something to get through, I made a companion resource called the Guide to Becoming. It's a scripture based reflection guide designed to help you stay rooted, honest, and present while you wait. not to rush forward, but to help you notice who God is forming you to be right here. You can download the Guide to Becoming right now. Just check the link in our show notes. Remember, you're not behind, you're not forgotten, you are becoming. Now back to our conversation. Okay, so we have a question that we ask everybody that we're talking to on the podcast, because it's called the Not Just Waiting podcast. And because we've been talking about waiting and how it's hard and you have to go through it to become, which again is hard, and nobody wants to do that.
Right.
We're all in a waiting season. And we joke at our house that everybody's in a waiting season, even if they're waiting just on Jesus. You know, like those older friends that have like lived their life and they're like, I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back, and you laugh at them. They're not laughing. They're like being for real.
Yeah.
And we honestly should probably live like that, but I don't have that context yet. I mean, I do, but there's stuff. And you know how like the Left Behind series kind of thing? I don't know if you grew up in Left Behind culture. My parents were very far into it, and I know my mom's listening and she can hear my trauma about it. But we would listen and watch the movies that had Nikolai Carpathia in them. And we were in like middle school and high school, and they would show it pre-Sunday school. And like this was a great idea. And so we'd be talking about it, and like you'd leave and you're like, I need to get right with Jesus right now.
Right now.
Um, right now. But then in your brain you're like, but I would like to get married. And
Yeah.
I would like to have small people, and I would like to have grandchildren, and I would like all these things you would like to do. Well, we're not quite to the old people level of I'm just waiting on Jesus yet, but we're all waiting on something. And we talk about how we have passive waiting and active waiting, and there's a time for both. So the passive waiting is me sitting on a couch eating peanut butter cookies and watching Netflix because I don't know how to be still either. I don't know how to rest, and I'm a very busy human. And then we have active waiting that's listening to the Lord and doing what he tells us to do. We should be doing a lot more active waiting than passive waiting. Both have their own things, and we need to be doing both, but in different ways. So, in this season, how are you waiting well?
Well, I think anybody who's listening would probably be like, is she really waiting well? Because I've told you a whole lot about where I am in my season. Um, I think it goes back to redefining success. And that's the only which is like my cheat way to say I'm passively and active waiting, right? Because I think if I get to a point, creating margin, right? Walking Rocky. Like that's a very tangible. I'm trying to figure out what that looks like to kind of stop and allow myself to think. And again, I kind of alluded, I think I said this, like I didn't know how I wasn't doing the journaling right. It terrified me. And then somebody said, well, just sit. And I was like, well, that's not right. Like that's not what journaling is about. People talk about filling journals and like Annie F. Downs, right? She talks about someone has to burn the journals. And I'm like, that's not just sitting, right? Like,
Mhm.
and so I tried it. I tried this year. I tried just sitting. And it was hard, but I didn't, again, the micro change. Like I just sat for a little bit. And then that's when I was like, oh, we just talked about Joshua. And so I was like, let me look that up. Right. And so it just kind of fell into that opportunity to learn and grow. And then I cheated and went from passive to active within that, right? See that sitting, right? Because I then got to learn, and then I started learning about where they were and what this meant and who Joshua was. And I was like, oh, okay, right. And so I think that's the I would have it's a both and for me, right? To be able to do that. But I think truly the highest level, if I'm saying it, is that desire to every day redefine success. And so we're working through John at our church. And just on Sunday, we talked about success, right? And he
Mhm.
talked about like, there's a moment where you're like, oh, just let me get married. And then you get married and you're like, oh, right? There's always something else. And when we allow that and society to define that success, we're always going to have this longing for earthly things, no matter what that is. And I think that's where I get like really freaked out because that longing is slipping in without me noticing.
Mhm.
And so I being able to actively try to redefine success, which I think it was before we started hit record, right? This idea of 2026, I've been looking at, well, what does it look to be a servant, to serve others, um, to be open-handed, and a lot of that for me has been, I have control issues on my time because everything is, right, succinct and scheduled, and how do
Mhm.
we do that? I joke our home, I love having people over, but then I'm like, "But take your shoes off." Or wait, don't sit on that couch. Or right. And so I had a whole long talk with Jesus about like, this isn't my home anyways, right? Like there I could tell you the story of how have been able to be here, but right, how do I just simply say, come as you are,
Mhm.
right? I want people to feel loved and feel seen, to feel known, to feel appreciated because how many days do we not feel that way? And how do we really act into that? And so I think the 2026 has been a season specifically of how can I be open-handed? How can I serve others? And when you ask ways to serve others, God opens those doors and opens your eyes. And somebody once told me too, right? The opportunity to slow down isn't necessarily about time, but the noticing.
Mhm.
And what are we missing? That terrifies me. What am I missing because I'm moving too fast? Or I even think about, right, like the looking down at the cell phone. Um, just I dropped off our kids a couple of weeks ago and there was a rainbow in the sky. And so I drop them off and I turn and I hear one of the teachers, because it's like a little back gate area that we drop them off at. And one of the teachers said, "Oh, look, that's beautiful." And I turned and I could only see the right side of the rainbow. And I was like, man, like I would have missed that had I not looked up or heard somebody say this. And so I got to the end of the pathway where there was more of a clearing and I could see the full rainbow, both sides of it. I was like, man, what am I missing that is his promise every day because my mind's on the next thing. My head is down. I'm in the phone, whatever that could be. To finish off that story, by the time I got home, because of course I was going to come in and make my husband come out and look at the rainbow, turned to see the rainbow and it had gone behind storm clouds and you could barely see it. And I thought, like, what it's fleeting. These things that God puts into our lives come and go so quickly. And if we aren't waiting well, if we aren't asking for our focus to be shifted, because it's not things we can do, truly. If it's all about I would be in so much trouble if it was about my might and my power and my ability. Um, but to be able to just say, like, okay, what does this look like? What does this look like today? To see the rainbow at the moment that it happened. And, so that was a very impactful. Now the other thing that God put on my heart with that was that the rainbow was actually still there. So he is constant. Like, it was behind the storm clouds at that moment, right? I know they go away. I get, like, all the weather stuff, but at that moment when I was trying to find it, it was so pale and behind the storm clouds, but he was there and it was faithful and, like, you could still see it. But it's a get to, right,
Mhm.
aspect. I got to see it in its full glory because he lifted my eyes up at that moment or had somebody say it at the right time. So it is I think it's just and it looks different for everybody, right? The waiting well,
Mhm.
what gives people peace or focus is all different for everybody.
That was a great story. I loved that. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners today?
You know what? I think the reality of stories has continues to stick out. And I just recently somebody said everybody has a story. Everybody has a story that they want you to know, but then they also have a story that they may not want you to know the whole part of. And it isn't, I don't think it's our responsibility to pull the story out of everybody, but it is a privilege to get to be a part of other people's stories. Um, in seasons where God allows that to happen. And I also know there were seasons of waiting where if God said, like, "Go be a part of their story," I would have just crumbled, right? Like, and it is an ebb and flow, but I think just kinda to your point, the stories are what make it come alive. Even the stories in the Bible, right? Like, there's the stories make it sticky, and Jesus used stories for a purpose, and so I think of just, this has nothing to do with waiting, but I think that would be my aha moment of our conversation of what what are those stories that we're a part of? What are those stories that we're not a part of that are around us that we should pay attention to? And just really taking that time to pause and hear or share and invite others in well.
Yeah, absolutely. Random, can you
Yeah.
tell us about what you're working on? Some of the cool stuff that you're working on?
Goodness. So, yes. So right now, about a season of waiting is also relates to this to pull it back into, but about a year ago, probably, maybe even a year and a half ago, really felt God saying like, "Hey, Megan, you do all this really great work." So my background is consulting, from consulting nonprofits for fundraising specifically is why I stepped into the creating the company. I felt like God was really saying like, "Hey, this is where you need to be," and I said, "Are you sure?" And then ended up getting a coaching certificate, which is where you and I met, of course, because I realized the consulting helped the organization, the coaching helped the leader, and the hurt and the burnout and the compassion fatigue that I was seeing in that sector was breaking my heart. And I realized that these leaders, if they weren't able to work through this, they were going to leave. And then what was that going to mean for the sector? And because nonprofit leaders and nonprofits, like literally, were created to make the world a better place. Right. And so, like, that's if we didn't have that, what was that going to leave? Right. And so then, about a year and a half ago, realized that there were all these organizations that maybe had really small teams or really small budgets and weren't able to interact with me in a way that they didn't have time. They didn't. And so I really just felt this calling to create some training for them that basically at the moment, I thought, can I take everything that I do one on one with the client and put it in a training so that I can give this to people in a way that's life giving? It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be less time because they can walk through it at their own pace. And so in 2025 was working on that content, which meant because you're working on content, I couldn't be forward facing with clients. And so it definitely was a tension of waiting for me, honestly. If I'm confessing that of just like, okay, God, I feel this is where I'm supposed to be doing, but how do I what balance this? And so wrapped up, got all the content together. And so I'm launching that. I just this past Friday launched my first 6 week cohort. And so it's been really cool to see that kind of be flourished and launched. So that's where we are now of how do we launch this well? How do we really serve nonprofit leaders? Because the reality is that the leaders are so um, needed to do the work, right? Whether it's a faith-based organization, a secular organization, the every leader there has this vision and has this desire to make a world a better place, and they can't do it alone. And that's where the opportunity to kind of walk alongside them and to be able to encourage them and enable them, give them whatever resources they need to be able to do that because it's not something you can do alone. There's so there are lots of our conversation that relates into that. But yeah, it's been really exciting and the coincidences of God opening up doors, right? So launch this program. He's given me opportunities to speak to nonprofit leaders about compassion fatigue, really speak in to encourage them, opportunities to do things like a podcast that I've never done before. So it's just really cool to like say, like, okay, Jesus, like I'm here for it. I'll stand in the pluff mud. I will stand and be stinky. Eh, Just allow me to be faithful. And the fruit that comes from that is really sweet to be able to do that. It's the hard part of the waiting in that middle
Mm,
part. That's tricky.
yeah. This was so much fun.
I love it.
I cannot convey to you how much fun this was, and I will be texting you after. Um,
Good friends. These
it
two.
has been so fun. I am gonna link all of the books that Megan mentioned, because she has a great library, in the show notes. I'm going to link her Instagram and her company's Instagram, and I'm going to link her newsletter so that you guys can get connected. If you know nonprofit leaders or are a nonprofit leader yourself, get plugged in. I know when I worked at a nonprofit, I would have like not killed, but killed for her, cohort. I would have been like, please, anything, please help. So if you know a nonprofit leader or somebody that works in a nonprofit, please send them this because it might just change their life. Like,
Mm.
actually.
Thank you. Thank you. And you know what? The newsletter has been something that has become a joy of because and I told my husband, so he helps with the company. We work together on things, and I said, like, this right here is what I dreamed to be doing because it's free. I like give everything I can away in the newsletter. There's an encouragement section, there's a coaching section, and then there's ideally something I'm giving away in there. Some weeks it's a tidbit or wisdom, but sometimes it's a download or things like that. And I was like, this is what I was called to do. And he's like, okay, Megan, you got it. But so, yeah, I thank you for sharing that. I would love for people to join that. Again, because not everybody can do a class or a training or show up. And so I want to show up for people who are showing up for others and pour into them as best as possible. So, yes.
This is so exciting, and you do a really good job of it. So, friends, this has been fun. I hope you have had as much fun as we have. I genuinely really do. So, it's been a great time, and we will see you guys next week. Bye, friends. Thanks for listening to the Not Just Waiting podcast. I hope today reminded you that even in the in-between, God is working, and you are not alone. If this episode encouraged you, would you share it with a friend? And don't forget to hit follow so you never miss a moment of truth, hope, and real conversation. You can find me on Instagram at rihanna.ivy.hoff and join the community over on Substack for deeper reflections and weekly encouragement. Until next time, take heart, friend. God is in the waiting with you.